Hello and welcome. My name is Alex Romero from Galasso Learning Solutions. Today we're going to be looking at GASB 105, which is all about our subsequent events. Now, GASB 105 came out at the end of last year in December of 2025. And really, it's about enhancing consistency on the application of what a subsequent event is and providing the information that our financial statement users really need and seek about these subsequent events. Now, you might be asking yourself, how did we get to the point where we needed a specific standard about subsequent events? Well, prior to this, we were using AICPA guidance and in Statement 56. And so now we have something that's going to be specific that's talking about governmental accounting. And it's going to put these subsequent events into two buckets, our recognized and our non-recognized events. So we're going to go through and kind of get an understanding of what each of these different buckets is. But before we do that, it's a good idea to understand, well, what is the definition of a subsequent event? Well, a subsequent event is going to be either a transaction or an event that occurred after the financial statement date, but before the date when the financial statements are available to be issued. Available to be issued is another new term that we're seeing in GASB 105, so it's a good idea to know what that means. And available to be issued is that the financial statements are complete in compliance with GAAP and all the approvals have been obtained. Once you have those two key pieces, then they are available to be issued, those financial statements. So now let's go back to our two different buckets. So we have first our recognized events. What is going to be a recognized event? Well, it's going to be a subsequent event that was indicating that the conditions existed as of that financial statement date, and also they are informing the accounting estimates that are within the financial statements themselves as of that financial statement date. So that's when it's going to be a recognized event. Now, on the flip side, we also need to understand what a non-recognized event is. So a non-recognized event is going to be a subsequent event that results in a significant effect. This can be favorable or unfavorable. So you can't just have one or the other saying, well, we're only going to talk about events that had a significant event that's going to have a significant effect that is going to be favorable to the financial statements. No, it's got to be favorable or unfavorable. So you have that significant effect, and it is something that needs to be recognized or disclosed in the basic financial statements in that reporting period. And we also need to make sure that it's one of the following type of transactions. So it's either going to be something debt related, maybe a government combination or disposal of a government operation. Maybe it's a change to legally separate entities that compose the financial statement entity. It could be a transaction or event that is really needed for that user analysis. So something that's more significant, and that's what it says. It has to have a significant event, but it's not something that's going to be informing the financial statements as of that financial statement date. So recognized is going to be something that has an estimate, part of the financial statements is going to affect the financial statements, and then our non-recognized isn't going to be informing those conditions that existed as of that financial statement date. And really, we want to make sure that we are going to be giving the proper disclosures, because if they don't have an effect on the financial statements, they're not going to be within the financial statements, so they're going to be in our notes disclosure. So we want to make sure that we're talking about a description of what this non-recognized event is and what its effect is going to be on the financial statements. How do we see this going about into the future? We also want to have an estimate of the amount of that effect on that non-recognized event. Or if you're not able to kind of come up with an estimate, you need to give a reason why you're not able to get to that point. So maybe it's still very early in the process, thinking of a business combination or getting rid of a governmental unit, and you haven't gone through all those steps yet, so you don't have all the figures in place yet, but you know that it's going to be happening. And so when we are at the point to which we are going to be issuing the financial statements, we do understand that this needs to be reported and disclosed as a non-recognized event. We can't figure out that estimate, so we're going to just disclose that and say that this is really early stages of our negotiations or whatever the reason behind that is going to be. But just explain that so that your users, because you're only providing this information because it could have a significant impact on the way that they are going to be analyzing your financial statements. So these notes to our financial statements need to talk about the date through which our subsequent events have been evaluated and should be disclosed in the notes to the financial statements. So we need to identify that our subsequent event date is maybe 90 days after the financial statement date or whatever that turnaround is. But you need to make that really clear, especially when we're talking about, well, we have unrecognized or non-recognized events, and when or how is that going to be affecting our financial statements going into the future. Well, that date is going to be very important for that aspect. And the date should be disclosed regardless if you have recognized event or a non-recognized event. So you still need to talk about this and say, we did evaluate and looked at subsequent events after the financial statement up until this date. And we did not find anything that needed to be a recognized event or a non-recognized event. But you still need to disclose when you did that evaluation through, because then 2 weeks later, something might have popped up and could have been a non-recognized event. And people would say, well, why didn't you disclose this? And it's, well, because that was after we had issued the financial statements and that subsequent event date had gone past. So we have a number of key takeaways that we'll be kind of gaining from our GASB 105, and some of that is looking at the new requirements in here, looking at those different buckets that we have for our subsequent events and really evaluating if it's a recognized event or a non-recognized event and what that means, understanding what the definition is of a subsequent event, and that issuance date. So that was something that didn't have consistency in the past. People had interpreted that differently. So having that clear definition about when the financial statements are able to be released, that is now going to help us make sure that we're all applying this correctly and consistently across the board. We also have further clarification and examples of what recognized and non-recognized events are going to be. So you can go to GASB 105 and actually look at that information and see exactly what would be qualified in these different buckets and kind of look at what you're working on and see, all right, where do I think this is going to land? And then also we're going to have that very distinct and clear disclosures that we need to have for those non-recognized events and having those within our note disclosures. So that's a lot to kind of take in, but it's nothing that's too earth-shattering. It's really just talking about those events and transactions that are going to be after that financial statement date, but they're going to have an impact. They're either going to be something that existed as of that date that we need to evaluate, or it's something that's going to be so important to us going into that next year that we need to talk about it now because we can't just ignore it. I think that's the biggest thing, is that if we know something's going to be happening, we can't just push it off and say, well, we'll look at this next year when we get to that audit. No, if we know about that now and it's going to have that significant impact, we need to make sure that we are giving the disclosures correctly and really informing people so that as they're looking at the financial statements, they don't have one perception and then maybe something completely changes because of a subsequent event that is happening that we knew about when we issued those financial statements. So when is this going to be effective? Well, this is going to be effective for fiscal years beginning after June 15th, 2026, and then all reporting periods thereafter. As always, or typically, we see this next item here, early application is encouraged, so that is something you can go ahead and do. But what we're looking at is going to be those fiscal years of start at fiscal year ending of 6/30/2027 and those calendar year ending of 12/31/2027. So this is going to be effective, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of this as we get into 2027. But now that it has been issued and it's out there, we need to have a greater understanding of every single piece of GASB 105 so that we are ready to hit the ground running as this goes effective after June 15th of 2026. So thank you so much for joining me as we looked at GASB 105 subsequent events.